Blood for the Thaumaturge by Zoey Kacaba. A bunch of us waited in a haunted house. That's the most succinct way I can describe it. To be clearer, though, 7 of us waited in a living room from a bygone era. Fire was the primary source of illumination. Candelabras were disseminated on piles of books and the window ledge. Flames and an open wood burning hearth gave more light and served as the only heating in mid-October. There were cobwebs on the ceiling and a half-spent, dusty decanter on a coffee table with some crackers and cheese set out on it. Refreshments nobody expected or wanted, except for John Smith. Noted idiot in a community already full of people making bad decisions. I was a wannabe amongst them, a recent high school graduate with a romantic notion of thieves, acquired from a video game. And this is the first time that I've admitted that because it's embarrassing. I've actually never stolen anything of great value. One Swedish berry from the corner store when I was a kid, a bag of chips from a party when I was 17. I got away with both, and it was thrilling. Social isolation after COVID and a shitty serving job motivated an excursion into the dark web, where I stumbled into a nefarious and vague proposal. Grave robbers required. It was a simple request, and antiquated just like the house, a dilapidated Victorian tucked behind a cemetery so old there were soldiers buried there from the War of 1812. I thought it might be role play at first, but the messages that I got gave real locations, an address, and a meeting time. Midnight the following week, the perfect time for those with a naive and slightly romantic notion of theft. Midnight. I kept reminding myself that this could all be for fun. I mean, why would anybody rob a grave these days? The proposal in a thief for hire forum also attracted idiots like John Smith. He was the only one who posted a real picture of himself and often argued with other posters about tricks of the trade. His writing was so full of spelling errors, it was really hard to take him serious. In this room, however, he looked like the only real criminal. Big, tattooed, and one of his eyes was constantly half shut, like he'd been in a recent fight. The rest of us there looked as nervous as I did. We'd been admitted to the house by an older man wearing a pinstripe suit. I thought he was like a butler or maybe a bodyguard who had passed his prime. We were received from the veranda without a greeting or introduction and delivered to the antique living room where we waited for the stroke of midnight, and then we waited some more. "This is some baloney," John Smith said into his dirty glass, mystery liquor from the decanter. It was brown, like whiskey or something, I don't know. "It's almost 12:30, a skinny guy with an oiled mustache said, pointing unnecessarily to the grandfather clock. He obviously wasn't a real thief either, much too sweaty. A pocket door slid into the wall, and the man in the pinstripe suit appeared again. He smiled and bowed very slightly, and a stale church smell drifted into the room from behind him. "My apologies for keeping you waiting." He entered, and everyone backed away just a little bit as he strode to the fire and warmed his hands. For an old guy, he was big and kind of muscular, but it wasn't his physicality really that made us give way when he approached. There was a sort of calm detachment and authority about his bearing. Plus, I mean, really, he was the most attractive guy in the room. I am Reed. The pause made it seem like he'd made up the name. You all know I've invited you here for a job, and you know the nature of that job, in part, is to dig up a grave in a cemetery nearby. What you don't know, however, is that the grave contains the remains of my recently deceased daughter, Elizabeth. His words were spoken so plainly that it was impossible to tell how he felt about it. You'd think he'd be pretty torn up. He stared into the dying fire, fingers weaved together while his index fingers rubbed the opposite knuckle. Your task is simple. Open her casket and secure for me a vial of her blood, a lock of her hair, and no less than 3 fingernail trimmings. You'll be paid when the items are delivered. Nobody moved or said a word. Most had their arms crossed. We get $5,000? John Smith asked. That's not much between 7 of us. Only I was able to see the old man's profile and the little smile he wore. It won't be 7, Reed said. At least 3 of you have already decided to leave. Now that you know I'm not kidding and that this is not a game. And if you were not committed, now would be the time to go. Just go. But be quick about it. Again, with the very boring talk, making those with weaker resolve wince as it overwhelmed their ability to think. John looked around. We all did. Who would be the ones to leave? 4 people quietly filed from the room into the hall and out into the cold. John Smith, Mustache Sweat, and I remained. Just 3. When the front door shut quietly, Reed continued. So it's you 3. Good. He took a leather-covered box from the mantel and passed it to me. Inside, you'll find 3 vials. 1 for each item requested, of course. Do you have your own shovels? Ugh, I suddenly felt like such an idiot for not having brought a shovel. I have one, John said, in my car. The man clearly did not give a crap about being caught. Driving your own car to the crime scene seemed like the ultimate in stupidity. Very good, Reed said. Please return before dawn. Her grave is clearly marked. She is the only Elizabeth in the cemetery. He walked back to the pocket door, stepped through to the adjoining dining room, and shut us out. The 3 of us waited around like something else might happen. And when it didn't, I said, well, let's go. Rather undramatically, we shuffled out onto the veranda. John Smith stopped down to the sidewalk and turned around to look at the high windows of the Victorian house. He smiled and then he laughed his butt off. What's so funny? Mustache Sweat asked. John could barely speak. He was in tears laughing. That guy thinks we're going to dig up his daughter for blood and hair and shit? Are you fucking kidding me? His laughter petered out, and he wiped some drool off his face. He looked at me and Mustache, and his dull face became concerned. Don't you guys get it? We give him some hair and blood, a toenail, and boom! Payday. He started walking. Off the curb, across the street, and to the open cemetery gates. What do you mean? I asked. What do you mean? He repeated back. You really want to dig up a body? Newsflash. It's super hard to get blood from a dead body. It isn't flowing anymore, and gravity makes it pull in the lowest portion of the corpse. Throw in some decay, and it leaks out of the corpse. It annoyed me that he seemed to know something about corpses that I did not, but also gross. Why would this guy send us to get something that we couldn't get, though? Come on, Mustache, back me up. Mustache frowned. My name is Richard? Is that your real name? I asked him. He stopped walking and his pale skin reddened. No, he lied poorly. I shook my head. That can't be true, I said to John. He kept walking to the cemetery, through the withered stones and weathered names. Mustache and I jogged to catch up as he struggled up the first rolling hill with his thick body. Blood congeals after death, then the decay. You freeze the body, keep it preserved, maybe. But any decent mortician sucks out all the fluid anyway, so the chances of getting blood are like zero. It's pretty cold out, I said. Maybe there's a chance. I wanted to get paid, and I didn't want to deceive our patron, Mr. Reed. If I was going to be a thief, like the one in the video games that I play, then I'd followed a vague and sort of contradictory code of conduct. I was kind of still working that part out because I really didn't know that this was real until now. Plus, there was something about Reed. His size and his confidence were factors contributing to his overall clout, but there was definitely something more. In retrospect, it was like being in water with a shark. Not that I've ever done that, but once when I was about 8, I imagined that a scenario in a pool with a shark, and I freaked out so badly that I just had to get out. And that's how I felt. No chance, John said, sitting down on a big stone coffin from like 2 centuries ago. So why are we in the cemetery? I asked. If we're just going to trick him, why are we here? Because, John said, we need a spot to get our samples, and if he's watching, it'll look like we really did it when we come back out of the cemetery. I saw a few problems with his reasoning, all of which I was happy to point out. First, we didn't walk in with a shovel like we were going to, and we wouldn't walk out with one either. His car, if there actually was a car, was not in view of the house. We didn't see it on our way by. Second, if he thought Reed might be watching, why would you laugh your butt off and then spill the con loudly right outside the house? Last, we didn't know what the color of Elizabeth's hair would be when we got this sample. Shit. John's curses produced spouts of frosty spit air from his lips. What are we going to do? Suddenly, it was somebody else's job to figure out the plan. And I could tell Mustache Sweat was not going to step up. Get a shovel, I said. Dig her up. Then we can get the hair and get the fingernails at least. We'll figure out the blood later, okay? Let's start with what we know is possible. Mustache Sweat Richard looked like he was going to vomit. I don't want to touch a dead body. He gestured jerkily to the cemetery in general. Look at how old the stones are. They don't bury people here anymore. When neither John nor I reacted, Mustache Sweat shook his head. I do not believe that that man's daughter is buried here. And he did have a point. John calmed down for a second to process whether or not he should resume his rant. He made the decision quickly. How are we going to get paid? Stop, John. His carrying on had stirred the nightlife in the cemetery. Bridal Veil Lake has always had issues with poverty and homelessness, but it had gotten much worse in the last few years. Drugs and their captives openly used in the streets and occupied spaces you'd never think to lie down, like a cemetery. Rail-thin shadows seemed to rise from the dead to view the morons in their midst. There were maybe a dozen empty eyes staring at us from under the shadow of a large maple tree. He looked like a freak yelling at these shadows of the people. Big man John did what a small man thinks big men do. What the fuck do you want? Money? Fuck off. He looked like a real special guy, yelling at people who don't even know where they are or what they're doing. Vestiges of human bodies. A shovel bounced off the ground at their feet. What? These people were giving us a shovel. What? Why did they have a shovel? Why did they give it to us? These questions were not answered. Thanks, John said. He acted like he deserved their help and didn't hesitate to retrieve the damn shovel. His swagger vanished, though, when he got to the bottom of the hill, close to those people. Those druggies. Clutching the shovel, he backed away until he was with us again. Those aren't junkies, he said. What? I asked. Shh, he snapped before turning and walking away while trying to keep his eyes on the people below. He plowed through a worn gravestone right with his shin and... Damn it! Watch where you're fucking going! The fact that he nodded without any argument really freaked me out. If they weren't vagrants, then who were those people that freaked him out so much? Guys, Mustache Sweat said. He'd walked ahead of us. I saw him looking towards the gates and was certain he was about to run. But he found something else. Elizabeth's grave marker. He didn't look happy about it, though, like he was expecting a big payday. The chiseled name and the fact that she had died was about all I could make out from here. The year of death or birth might have said 1800, but I couldn't tell for sure. And that wouldn't have made any sense anyway. Reed said that it was the only Elizabeth in the whole cemetery. But Mustache was right. They didn't bury newly dead here. There was no marker around here that was anywhere close to now. John Smith leapt on the shovel to chop through the grass. Hold on. This cannot be right. John did not stop. He said there was only one Elizabeth. This is it. So I don't give a crap about anything but the money. So the scrape of the shovel finished the thought. John began to sweat and breathe rapidly. His progress was swift, like he had done this before. I opened the leather case from Reed and found the vials packed in cloth. Nail clippers, scissors, and the biggest syringe ever made had also been included in the pack. I had to screw the needle into the plunger. John had tired of digging and conscripted Mustache to join the task. Mustache winced with every plunge, and he wasn't very fast. I got impatient with him, and I grabbed the shovel. He gave it up without protest and sat on a patch of wet grass watching, head in his hands. I couldn't go much faster, and it was John who finally lost patience and took the shovel from me. As much of an asshole as he was certainly the strongest of the trio, and this is what he was good at. He struck the casket at no more than 4 feet deep. Then his feet plunged through the rotted lid, crushing Elizabeth's dusty chest cavity. For fuck's sakes, he raged, and I felt a little better because he resumed assholery meant that the encounter with the cemetery people hadn't permanently scarred his simple little brain. So everything was somewhat normal, I guess. But the sounds of breaking bones. Ugh. John tried stepping out of Elizabeth, but the casket was as paper thin as her, and he ended up stomping a lot of her lower body in the process as he flailed around. John climbed out and he used the shovel to remove the rest of the lid and fully reveal the long deceased Elizabeth. I held the nail clippers and scissors out to him, looking to see where we could cut. Where are her hands now that it's been trampled to pieces? Why should I? I interrupted his process. Because you're already covered in Elizabeth. I was a little bit angry. He took both instruments and leapt back in, viciously stomping her legs some more. He cut ragged strands of soiled brown hair and explained how lucky we were that she still had fingernails. Fingernails decay slow, but they still do decay. We're really, really lucky. John handed Mustache the hair first. I feel so lucky, Mustache said. I held open a vial and made him poke it down into the vial until I could see that it was in and I could put on the stopper. John leapt out with a handful of fingers instead of nails. Just easier. They won't fit into the vial, I said. John handed me the clippers and I carefully trimmed up the nails, which fell off the fingers too easily. After placing the stopper in on those, we stood around like idiots, wondering about the blood. Elizabeth's blood had run dry. There was nothing there. Not a chance. Her hand just came off. We knew it, but discussing a solution required the sensitivity of someone with none. Fortunately, we had John. Okay, kid, John said to Mustache, roll up your sleeves. I raised the syringe, anticipating what was going to happen. Index and middle fingers placed firmly into the steel rings on the base. Why me? Mustache said. Because you haven't done shit. I nodded, mostly because I didn't want to get stabbed by last millennium's needle. It was cool as shit to be holding it, though. Very Eldritch Lovecraft without the racism. Guess I have... Ow! Fuck. I stabbed him in the bicep, figuring that it would be easier if he didn't see it coming, but it was not. Retracting the blood out of his bicep was not easy, but I got it done. I put everything back into the leather case, and John gave me an approving nod that I really didn't need. The approval of an idiot is an insult. I said it. John tossed down the shovel, and nobody griped about reburying Elizabeth, or what was left of her. We got the hell out of there. The shadows beneath the tree had crept forward, and their eyes shimmered like cats. We mounted the porch of the Victorian house, and I knocked hard. Just like before, Reed took us into the living room, where the fire had been further built up. I wrung my wretched hands over the flame, but they wouldn't stop shaking. I felt like Lady Macbeth. Very good, Reed said without emotion. He reached for the case. John got in between me and Reed. Whoa, hold on there. Where's the money? The old man retracted his hand into his pocket smoothly and produced a fat wallet, stuffed with cash and business cards. He handed John his cut, and John counted it out loud, $1,666. We were going to be stiffed on $2 by my math. And I didn't think John would be cool with that. But luckily, he was too stupid to notice, but smart enough to take the money and leave the house right away. Reed paid Mustache and I next. We gave him the leather case. I guess we were more polite because neither of us hid the bricks, even though the old man said nothing and simply watched us for longer than my comfort would allow. Your hesitation suggests curiosity. Would you like to see what these items are for, miss? No. But he turned abruptly and made for the open pocket door. Mustache, silent, followed. I could have left right then. It's a good thing I didn't, I guess. Maybe I'd be dead then. But that wouldn't have been better. I followed. Reed walked us through the dining room to a basement door and down some unfinished stairs to a dirt floor basement. There were tables and tool benches everywhere, and all of it covered in white tarps. It smelled moist, which is a gross word. Mustache blocked my way, lingering on the bottom step. Either Reed didn't notice or he didn't care. He removed a tarp from one of the side benches, and there lay the cold, lifeless body of a child. That was enough for me. I mean, an old, long dead person is one thing, but a child intact was another. I don't know why, but it was. I would have run if Mustache hadn't have pushed me down when he run past me up the stairs. Reed laughed. It's not real, he said. Come, look. I went over reluctantly and with slight hope. I wasn't seeing a child murder victim on display. It's wax over stone over plastic and, I don't know, was that explaining everything about this whole situation? The girl had no hair, no fingernails, and no blood, of course, if she had non existent veins. She wore a black dress like Wednesday from the Addams Family. I'd say she had been made to look about maybe 7. That wasn't your daughter in the cemetery, I said as I continued looking at the doll. No, she is. But I required reliable people, as he gestured to us and looked back at the girl on the table. And I couldn't think of a better way to find one. A test? Do you mean a test? Yes and no. I do need these items. Reed placed the case on the table above the wax figure's head. But I'm going to need a lot more. A lot. He emphasized a lot. Looks like you're the one. What do you say, miss? I'm not sure what you're asking, I said, slowly creeping backward towards the stairs. He crossed towards me quickly and clutched my tiny wrists in strong, dry hands. We'll see you in church this Sunday, he said, placing his antique syringe in my hands. You'll know what to bring, I'm sure. Be careful on your way out. He suddenly turned his attention back to the wax girl in the leather case. I'd been released or dismissed. Confused and relieved, I mounted the steps and arrived in the upstairs hall to a commotion outside. Somebody yelled and somebody squawked, and I had an inkling of what it might be about. I put my fingers through the steel rings and stepped onto the veranda to find my expectations were realized. John Smith stood over Mustache Sweat cowering on the sidewalk. There were bills at his feet, and when John looked at me, mustache ran off. We watched him go, and it took a while before he was out of sight around the corner. So you know how this goes, John said. Just give me your cut, and we're good. He held out his palm. No, not going to happen. I don't know how I said those words, to be honest, because I was really, really scared. John Smith was way bigger than me, and he had been very reckless and aggressive up until now. Then this goes, he said, striding with confidence along the walkway to me on the veranda. I stabbed him really hard in the cheek with that syringe. He fell backward and he hit his head. He didn't get to finish his sentence. Then he spasmed, legs kicking, until he coughed up blood and started breathing again. No, he didn't die. I looked around for witnesses, and that's when I saw Reed in an upstairs window. Him and that girl. She stood and lived and waved, and her lips moved, and I couldn't hear her, but I could tell what she said. We'll see you in church this Sunday. What? And then she let down some kind of mental facade, some mirage, and I saw what she was briefly. It makes little sense to define things by what they aren't, because that doesn't tell you what they are. However, really can't do much more than that. She wasn't human, but she wasn't a wax doll. She wasn't living, and she wasn't dead. She wasn't the porcelain-like skin that she wore, but she wasn't a little girl either. And in that body, there dwelled an entity like no other, a homunculus housing an entity, an ancient foe my primal self recognized. I was currency to it, or at best, a traitor to bring others of my kind into its ethereal sway. If I'm being vague and dramatic, it's because I don't have many literal words to describe what I saw. Imagine bleached white bones twisting around a torso under pressure from within by a darkness so complete that it strangled the light. There were eyes, too. Eyes you could feel like a grip under your chin, forcing you to look into the abyss of its hidden self. And that is only what it chose to reveal to me then. A moment later, the girl appeared as a little girl in an old dress once more. As Reed nodded, so did she, and I knew what they wanted. I took John's blood with the syringe, and I left. I stumbled around until early dawn, aimlessly, and I realized that it was Sunday when I finally checked my phone. Time to go to church. What church? Did it matter? I guess it didn't, because I picked one at random, and I guess my feet took me there, or my brain took me there, and it was the right one. Nervous smiles under suspicious scrutiny of my messy hair and dirty clothes were my introduction to the Catholic Church. Parishioners guided me to a pew in the back. I still held the syringe, but I guess it was hidden far enough up my coat sleeve that nobody seemed to notice. Two men sat in front of me and seemed excited. They whispered amongst themselves. They say he's a thaumaturge. What's a thaumaturge? It's like a miracle worker or something. Like a saint? The first man didn't look certain. Nah, if he were a saint, I think they'd call him that, right? Reed arrived in his priestly raiment to conduct the service, and the men stopped talking. The little girl didn't arrive with him, but she sat alone in the front row. I'm not a Catholic, I'm not religious, so I didn't understand the rituals, and I didn't bother to follow along as they stood up, so sat down, knelt to pray. I waited until he came and invited me into some sort of dressing room. She was there, and I gave her the blood that I got from John's cheek. She squirted it into her mouth directly from the syringe. Both of them smiled at me sweetly and stared and didn't offer a word until I tried to leave. "We'll see you in church next Sunday," the girl said. I remember nodding enthusiastically, dumbly. I go every week. I bring new blood. It can never be the same. I don't know if this is a necessity, honestly, or a preference, or if it's any sort of difference to a monster like this. I prefer blood from people who are willing to give it, of course, because I'm not a monster. But it is hard to find cooperative donors. The dark web is very useful in that regard, luckily. John Smith offered his blood again for $50. He'd just try to rob me, or maybe he wanted revenge for stabbing him in the neck. I don't know. Plus, it already had his blood, so wasn't into that. I know you try to help those who write. So maybe you would know someone that would want to help me out with a sample. It only hurts a little, I swear.